CargoWise Landside is deeply committed to revolutionizing landside logistics. With a complete enterprise system built for modern trucking and container drayage operators that includes proven drayage transportation management, digital rate and quote management, real-time container track and tracing, and on-demand truck, trailer, and container storage. Excellence in container drayage starts with the right software. Enhance transportation management, optimize shipment execution, and improve intermodal business operations with Trinium TMS, Draymaster, GeoStamp Track, and SecureSpace. To learn more, please visit cargowise.com/landside.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of TPM Today, the June 27th episode. We're literally halfway through 2025, which is kind of bonkers. Really delighted you could join me on this Friday. I don't know where you are, but the last 4 days in the DC area have been like the Dante's like worst level of the inferno. Thankfully, it cooled off today. It's really nice today. Hope it's nice where you are. I have a great guest today, someone I've known for a few years who's doing something super interesting in the world of trucking. Can't wait to bring him on in a few minutes. But a couple things to mention before I do that. Inland registration is open. We are about 3 months out, end of September in downtown Chicago. We'll all be joining huge hundreds of people in our industry, shippers, carriers, brokers, drayage providers, intermodal providers, ports, you name it. Software companies, obviously, because I'm there, will be there. If you have not registered yet, new registrants can get 10% off a pass by using the code EJ10 when you register. So hope to see you there. There's going to be tons of technology discussions like the one I'm going to have today about how technology is impacting the world of trucking. I'm actually later today, as soon as this episode ends, actually, I'm jumping in an Uber to go to the AAEI conference, the American Association of Exporters and Importers, to discuss trade compliance and tariffs and all the fun stuff that everybody's dealing with these days. So it's been a great event. Lots of talk about trade policy and where it's going and what's happening. We're about less than 2 weeks away now from the initial deadline for the reciprocal tariffs on countries outside of China. It sounds like from the administration yesterday that deadline might be pushed back a little bit. So the uncertainty continues. So hopefully I'll be finding out lots more about that later today. I did want to highlight one story that one of my colleagues at the Journal of Commerce did. Michael Angel, our Northeast and Gulf Coast reporter, was at the AgTC event in Tacoma last week, hearing about how exporters are dealing with a range of challenges right now, from schedule unreliability to the impact of tariffs on their markets and reciprocal tariffs from other countries on their markets. It's not an easy market right now. It's never an easy market for exporters. They're always dealing in a low margin industry. They generally are the afterthought when it comes to service. From carriers that are much more concerned about the higher paying head haul cargo that's being imported into the US. So very interesting story, definitely worth your time to go and read. It's a pretty exhaustive piece about all the different challenges confronting US exporters right now amidst some of that turmoil that I mentioned. So with no further ado, it's time to bring my guest on. My guest this week is Daniel Powell, who's CEO of a company called Optimal Dynamics. Dan, so glad you could join us. I've known you for a few years. It's great to finally have you on the show.
Yeah, it's a long time overdue, Eric. Yeah, it's been excited.
Yeah. So before we get into exactly what Optimal Dynamics is, what you do, some recent news, give us your background before you started Optimal Dynamics. I mean, I take it from your full head of hair. You were like an elementary school when you started it, but no, I'm just kidding. No, give me the background.
Maybe not too far off. You know, I actually co-founded the business with my father, who's not as active into the business and working more on his overall research. But he jokes that he couldn't find a good CEO for his first two companies, so he had to make one, and that's kind of how I got looped into this. I always wanted to do finance, econ, finance. I was a finance major in college. Worked at Merrill Lynch, and I think I lost interest when you kind of really learn that outside of like finance, where it's just gambling, what you do in most corporate finance actually isn't that exciting. It doesn't really move the needle for the world. And I sort of backed my way into OD. Maybe I was born into logistics and supply chain, which is a story that
You
probably
definitely were to a certain degree. Yeah.
yeah, and far too many can relate to. And so I was always an engineer at heart. My whole family's engineers. My grandpa was an engineer. My cousins are engineers. My dad was an engineer. And so starting the business was this like natural evolution of I get to build and run a business. Um, and I think that's probably why I couldn't get away from it. So
Yep.
it wasn't
No,
intentional. Kind of backed into it and used the skill sets and kind of fell in love with it.
yeah. Everybody. It seems like most people in the world of logistics or freight either back into it or they're pulled kicking and screaming by someone in the family. So you kind of had a little bit of a mix, which is interesting. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so we'll get into that. So, what is OD? Why did you start it? Who are your customers?
Yeah. So we're a technology company, plain and simple. We sort of pitched that we're building the decision layer of the physical world. So we had this sort of fundamental premise that how information has been changing, moving, passed from one another was changing dramatically. We have new sensors, new marketplaces, new databases, new this and that. But there was one core constant that's basically stopping innovation, which is that information is just still passed to the same source, which is a human making a manual decision about something. And we have not evolved much in 20 years. We may have regressed a little bit in my point of view.
Yeah. If you
That's
read if
another,
you read that book about our social media addiction, and that I think we have
we
probably
may have regressed the last 20 years, but that's for another debate.
yeah.
We just can't move the needle, right? We're talking about, 1 to 0.1 evolutions. We have a little bit more data to make a better decision. The data comes faster. We can act faster. But what is resulting, where you see in all of global supply chain, is one person who has a region or a zone of decisions that they make in a silo using a lot of sort of like past heuristics. I did this typically. I like to do this. I typically do this. Bad things don't happen when I do this. And what you see is a massive result in waste, a result in people who are just cranking the meat grinder. This is something that Wall Street got away from, 15, 20, 25 years ago. And then a lot of operational efficiencies. I mean, we look at just the truckload industry, and when we deploy at least our software, we see everything between 15, 25% operational efficiencies. You extrapolate that to an $800 billion industry, that gets passed to consumers, it gets passed to the market. That's hundreds of billions of dollars of just waste that's extracted through manual decision making that's been the same way it's done for, you know, 75 years. So that's why we started OD. We thought there was a fundamental different way to move the needle in decision making. And we've stubbornly stayed pretty focused to solving that point since we've, started the business. And we first thought we were crazy, but I think decision automation is a little bit more in vogue right now. So it's been fun to see some of those kind of tailwinds help us with our product education, just market education as well.
Yeah, definitely ahead of the curve, and I would say you're on a short list of companies that I've not seen like drastically pivot in one way or another.
Yeah.
Yeah, for better or worse. I'm not making a judgment. Like, so, there's different ways to get to the end goal. Who are your customers? Like, who do you serve? What are their traditional pain points?
Yeah. So net, we work with people who are managing fleets of truckload operations, some truckload operation. So
Yeah.
the bulk of our customers, probably 80% of them, are in the for-hire carrier space. They may range down to, I think our smallest customers are around 45 trucks. So we have these sort of like family-owned mom and pop-esque type businesses, all the way up to publicly traded multi-thousand truck operations.
Mega
And then we
carriers.
also, yeah, big, large
Yeah.
jumbo carriers.
Yeah.
And then all the way up to like mega operations like Coke Industries, KBX Logistics, for freight, things like that, who are, from the shipper or maybe 3PL light, but they're managing or controlling capacity. So they're not just dealing with transactional one way, but they have fleets, either private fleets or dedicated contract capacity that they plan. And then they use us to deal with basically end-to-end decision automation. So everything from strategic planning, how big should this fleet be, what customers should we work with, and then the lion's share is operational automation. So all of the transactional load allocation, acceptance decisions, down to driver planning, are all done through the OD platform.
And just really quickly, so on the private fleet side, so you work with shippers as well who are managing their own private fleets.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So shippers as well. Now it might be their own private fleet. This is kind of like semantics. Their own private fleet where they own the driver, they hire the drivers or changing the oils. And then we've seen a growing number of shippers who still want that planning control, but they don't want the trucking liability.
Yeah.
So they go and they get these highly controlled, dedicated operations that they fully plan, but they don't deal with a lot of the trucking maintenance that these trucking companies are quite good at.
Interesting. Got it. Okay. That's cool. That's an interesting wrinkle. The automation side of this. So, I mean, you sort of first talked about the justification for starting OD, right?
Yeah.
What there's this opaque idea that that you described, which is lots of people taking some data point and then making a decision off of that, and that being sort of a clunky way in aggregate for things to get done. What are the specific areas that you targeted that you saw an opportunity, like we can just change that process and take the human sort of out of it, maybe overseeing it, but out of the actual like manual part of it?
Yeah. So for our customers, there's two non-sexy but highly important decisions that we automate and that we focus on. So one is the actual like tender accept or load allocation decision. So they're making this they get tenders, they're trying to make that decision, or they're in a place where they accept all freight into their business. And then they're making a decision of allocation. So do I use my non-asset network to move this load, or do I actually use my asset internal? And then all the way down to like the driver planning. So which driver takes which load, their time and home schedules, managing all the appointments, on time, service. So that's kind of like the core areas we've focused in. It's been, pretty impactful. It's a very different view of deploying these types of technology. I probably have a little bit of given that we've done this so much and we're past this sort of like, this is just an idea phase. My view on getting to the next place is we actually really do have to remove the human. This whole idea of like human in the loop, where everyone's gonna have these little agents and human in the loop, is a bit of a fallacy. It's the same analogy to, we're gonna buy all the Uber drivers, self-driving cars, and then they're gonna do something.
They're just gonna sit in the car and chat with the guests.
Exactly. It's gonna be like Cash Cab from like that show where the guy's just gonna tell jokes the whole time. The reality, they get in the way more. So when I talk to our customers, we've talked about automation as a byproduct of our tools. Now that our sort of decision coverage is so high, we really view automation as the first step before you get to optimization. So until you can really remove the people from the process and you can have enough of the decisions that are made by the technology into the practice, you can't like get to the optimization right away. So the first step is actually reallocating people to value add tasks, non-transactional human tasks. And then we can start having sort of a single point of strategy by these machines, but it's the byproduct of we've removed 12 different people pointing in 12 different directions. and now it's sort of marching at the beat of one drum. And then you can start to really make tunes, make knobs, make strategic decisions, and that's where you can start to yield operational efficiency. So the whole topic of automation has changed a lot, and just the willingness to chat about it has changed, I think, dramatically over the last 18 months. Partly because of education, and then I think partly because of just necessity
Time
of economic
time
pressure.
marches
Yeah.
on. Like you hear something enough and it becomes a normal thing rather than a
Yep.
crazy thing. It might still be scary. I think we're at a very, this is my personal opinion, I think we're at a very potentially precarious point, because I totally agree with you. I think people are way more open-minded about the reality of this than they were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. They are not yet ready to reckon with what that means for like what their workforce looks like. And in aggregate, I don't think the industry at all is ready to reckon. Because I will tell you, I remember having a conversation like 3 years ago with someone in the trucking technology world who said, I can set up something where the person feels like they're making the decision, but the system is making the decision. I can set up something where the person is observing the system making the decision, or I can just set up something where the system is making the decision and the human is doing something and doesn't ever watch it. I know which one works best, but they don't necessarily want to hear which of those three options works the best. So
Yeah.
we're now at a point where that's going to start happening more and more. And we are going to have to start realizing like we have to take our hands off the wheel, and what else are we going to do with our hands? And I don't know if society is ready for that, honestly.
I totally agree. We spend the technology gets the limelight a lot. It's fun, it's cool. Outside of like pitches and things like that, when we're with a customer, we spend 95% of our time talking about people
Mm,
and like what is this person going to do. I've always really sort of taken a stance that, you know, somewhat this technology will change these people's jobs. It's really up to the leadership of what happens to their roles. So are their
yeah.
roles still going to be there? Or are they going to, you know, export? And
Yeah.
so I
Yep.
really believe that the technology, whether this is document processing, whether this is negotiations, rating, whether it's deep operational changes like what we do, it is replacing people's roles. What they're doing with their future jobs is something that needs to be
TBD.
thought about TBD, but needs to be thought about really critically.
Yeah.
And it needs to be done in parallel to the technology, or you're
Yeah.
going to really muddy the water on what's happening and is the technology working, or are we making progress? Because we've personally seen times where we've designed future state processes for customers and they kind of get cold feet and they don't do them, and it has a direct impact on their ability to use the technology because they're steering against the ship. And what do you expect out of it? So I agree. It's a lot changing. People need to really think critically about the true future role of that person, not just some like excuse of a decision. Um, and I think it's going to be the major conversation for
Yep.
these internal operations for a while now.
Well, we could go deep on the existential nature of all this, but let's get into some particulars. So I feel like the thing I've talked to you most about over the years, we probably first talked 2019, 2018, something
Something
like
like
that,
that.
maybe even earlier,
Yeah.
but was the complexity of trying to optimize what you're trying to optimize. So you have a fleet, let's say it's that mega carrier, 2,000 trucks plus. You're
Yeah.
trying to figure out what the optimal use of every single cab in every single moment is and how many different variables factor into that. So it's, that's not something that's hard to think of as being very complex. What has changed from a technology standpoint that is enabling you to kind of enabling the system to get its arms around this challenge?
Yeah. So it's funny. There's a lot that's changed, and there's also a lot that hasn't changed.
Yeah, your dad's been working on this problem since like the 70s, right? Basically.
70s, but even if
Yeah.
you look at hardware, for example, so the type of hardware infrastructure to solve this problem actually hasn't improved much over the last couple of years. What's improved a lot are like GPUs, these hyper parallelization type processes. But when you solve these problems, you can't use those because you can't solve time step 6 before you solve time step 1. You can't always just parallelize these problems. What has really started to change, and where we've started to see the sort of advent of these sort of agentic systems, is a byproduct or input to the point of decision, but not as a replacement of the point of decision. So most of these processes aren't good at making fundamental decisions. They're good at matching patterns. They're good at dealing with unstructured data, but they can't replace the core entity. They can't replace the core engine of the car. They're just fundamentally the wrong technology. So what we have seen is that these technologies are starting to get so good, we can fundamentally rethink about how we deploy, maintain, and even explain these types of decisions. So, for example, we don't market too much because it's easy to replicate, but our systems now can explain to users in plain English exactly what it's doing and thinking and why it doesn't make decisions. So if someone says, hey, I don't understand this, it will literally understand the diagnostics of the model and then explain to that user in natural English exactly why it did or didn't make a decision. And there's all these opportunities to look at unstructured data. So when you deal with like 99% automation levels, you actually pass the point of like algorithmic complexity. You start to wade into data quality as a major blocker. And so being able to start pointing these systems at unstructured data, allow them to like self-heal, self-tune the systems. So these like agentic workflows where they're using this like reinforcement learning process where you see data, you need to change the system, it adapts and changes. I think that's
What's an example of that? Give me an example of that, because I understand it, but like I think a concrete example would help me and everybody understand it better.
Yeah. So let me find a good example. So one could be even the purpose or structure of a type of employees at a company. So for example, we have a driver type, like a regional driver type, that's managed in some way. They don't like to go more than 200 miles around their domicile. But then you set these like maybe hard rules. And that would be like a legacy approach where you have these like kind of hard rules that you maybe set up to help curtail the model to do what you want to do. With these systems, you can start to observe these points and then basically have the model re-update these configurations to adapt to the future premise. So it can actually learn at what's not working. Hey, there's all these opportunities that you're missing on the table because of this rule. It can then suggest the change. If you look at making these drivers go 250 miles from home, there's $100,000 a month in profit opportunity, and you meet all of your service and time at home constraints. And then it can even go and update. So it can go and actually look for opportunities in the operation and then apply it to the system to improve. So it can really be anywhere, but that could be one of the ones that like our fleets deal with, where they set these hard rules for end of time. They tell us to follow some of them. But then having the system self-recommend ways to approach the problem differently, rather than optimizing within a constrained box, is kind of a really cool opportunity to potentially, self-tune, self-cure, and update core data rather than just the outputs.
That's a cool example. So explain to me why what you're doing, like you sell into a specific type of company or role. Explain to me how what you're doing has a broader impact on the industry. So if I'm a shipper that doesn't have a dedicated fleet, doesn't have a private fleet, why should I care about what you're doing for the for hire carriers I use and other entities that do have those things?
Sure. I think, we've had this conversation with some of our like bigger shipper customers who have these. And so they may be a little bit of biased. My fundamental view is it is expelling waste from their industry, and that gets passed on to them. You're in every shipment, every truckload, every move, you're paying for that staff, you're paying for that headcount, you're paying for that wasted decisions. Maybe not immediately, but you are at some point. That gets built into market pricing, and given how efficient the market is, it will just move to what is a reasonable cost of operation. So for the shippers, for the consumers, my view is that there's $200 billion of waste sitting out there from poor planning.
And you're
And that
indirectly paying
goes,
for that in some way.
someone's paying for that. Someone's paying for that in poor costs. And then outside of maybe improved service, improved quality, um, more resilient operations, faster time to deal with shocks into the network. But for me, outside of our trucking companies who are really trying to drive their business forward, drive revenue, I just view it as there is just a fundamental sort of plague of waste that happens, and until we can change the human decision, these companies are just limited by how constraining the human brain is. And until you fix that, consumers, shippers, anyone who has to pay for these types of transportation services will pay for that waste. So that's kind of our maybe grand view. When you only impact a small percentage of the industry, it's not going to get passed through. People are going to pocket it, but at some point, you can really start to move the needle for kind of everyone involved.
So obviously, people there are people that believe in that vision. So you just raised or announced that you raised. I know sometimes there's a delay in terms of when
Yeah,
the raises actually happen and when they're announced, but you just announced, what was it, in April? Do I have that right?
yeah, yeah.
April of
I honestly, the
40
time's
million.
like it was, yeah. So we just closed our Series C. So it was a $40 million round from a really strong partner and strategic, which is Coke. So that brings our total fundraising just a hair under $100 million. And as you said, just singularly focused on the same problem that we've been working on.
Yeah.
So
Well,
shared
I mean,
opportunity.
I guess I'm asking, so what's how, like, there's been obviously, we've been through a bunch of different mini cycles with VC and logistics, and we've seen that it works in some scenarios. It definitely does not work in other scenarios. There's certain
Yeah.
models where it's appropriately aimed at, and there's others. There's even a grand idea out there that I've discussed on this show with VCs and others that, like, maybe VC is the wrong model for logistics and on the whole, just because of the length of decision making on investment. Explain to me where you're at with some of these things.
So the premise of this capital raise for us was we weren't at the wire of like needing cash. It was, we've spent a lot of time and money making the technology work, and now it's time to distribute it at scale. So that was the premise of like what we're doing now, which is like we've solved the self-driving car enough to
Yep.
where we really can market this out. We're not beta testing this anymore. This is a true,
Yep.
Product. The Is VC right for this industry? It's another interesting question. Unsure. I think there was a lot of people who rushed into it, trying to sort of move the needle, not understanding it. I think it kind of distilled down to, I don't disagree with you. It's actually one of the reasons why we were so adamant on having a strategic partner. So Coke Industries, one of the largest exporter, one of the largest shippers of goods,
Yep.
really understands what it means to move the needle, and they know it's not going to happen in 12 months from investment.
Right.
So we really
Right.
needed a long-term partner. So we happen to agree, but we do also have a lot of really good venture partners who get it and understand it. I just think it's important for a founder, when you take investment, that they really get how hard it is to move this industry. And we've been doing this for years. And it's just you can't widgetize this
Rome was
industry.
not built in a day. Yeah.
No, too hard of a problem.
Well, I could go on. There's like 20 other things that I didn't even get to, so we'll have to do this again sometime. But I
Yes.
have to ask you, last question. I ask this of every guest: who's your favorite band or musician, and why?
That's funny. I'm always just a random music listener, but my favorite band for the last like 5 years has been this band from New York called AJR. I
Oh
don't
yeah,
know
I know.
why. Yeah.
Bang Bang Bang, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
my son
I've,
loves that song.
I don't know, just really like
Yeah,
them.
it's like quirky, kind of like clever,
Yeah.
kind of. Yeah, okay.
I just saw them at Madison Square Garden, which was cool because that was their first concert in Madison Square Garden, and their
That's the big
first
leagues. That's the big leagues.
big leagues, because their first concert ever was at Washington Square Park next to the people sewing together voodoo dolls. So definitely quite an evolution for them.
No, that's huge. That's huge. I had no idea I knew they were big. I didn't know they were that big. So that's cool. All right.
Very
Nice.
exciting for
Well,
them. Yeah.
we'll add them to the TPM Today playlist. Dan, thanks so much. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, go to our website, ultimatelyms.com, contact us there. One of our team members, will reach out and get in contact with you.
Cool. Thanks so much. This has been an awesome conversation. As I said, we barely scratched the surface, but yeah, looking forward to seeing you get sometime soon. All right. Have a great summer.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks. All right. Really quickly, dad joke of the week. So this one's a little different format than I normally do. So here's what is the Astley paradox, as in Rick Astley. The paradox is that if you ask Rick Astley for the movie Up, he can't give it to you because he's never going to give you up. But in refusing to give you the movie, he's also letting you down. There's the Astley paradox. That is like a labored dad joke, but I love it. It's so good. In any case, thank you, everyone. Thanks to Dan for an awesome discussion. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. I always appreciate the support and love doing this show for you all. I will be back in 2 weeks with another fantastic guest. Same time, 10 a.m. Eastern, second and fourth Friday of every month. Until then, have a great weekend, everyone. Hope you get to go to a pool or a beach or just chill out with a nice drink somewhere and a good book. But I will see you soon. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.